Okay. Oh, welcome everybody. Slightly later than usual login time for me at my end, and that's just things are running slower today than even though I got here extra early because I know I read this. I'm not that careless that the cafeteria was open until 2. And I drove up here extra early so I could have one of that wonderful salads in their salad bar before the pandemic. Some of you might remember they had really good food in general, and especially their salad bar. Nope, they close at 1 and I can't get here that soon. So that ended up meaning going somewhere else that I wasn't anticipating. So sorry for the late notice, but you guys, looks like we have a regular amount of attendance. So here's what's the good news for today for all of you. We're going to end extra early, not super early, but more than 10 minutes early. However, I think it's important to do 2 other things in addition to the notes you should take on the slides. The first is, I call it, housekeeping or cleanup stuff. And the only reason I'm doing it this way is because when I send individual emails, sometimes I don't have everyone's email address. I've already mentioned that one that can cause complete disconnect between, me and knowing who email address is whose, from the names on the roster if they're different. I mean, but also because it's early enough in the semester that it's easy to figure out some alternatives if you're missing, if anyone or a few students are missing. And this is true for every class, so it's not like I'm saying, there's any unusual thing about this. But at the moment, I didn't, as of this morning, I checked my email. I hadn't received, I had papers from just about everybody, but I hadn't received a midterm, which could have gone astray. I've checked my spam, like, of course, I suggest you guys do when I return your grades, if you don't get them along with everyone else. When I say I've sent them back and you don't see yours, you always should check your spam folders first and then contact me and ask me with this individual email to hit reply, and then I can attach the grade to that. But I didn't get yet a midterm from from Serena Ottens or Elijah. And I know that they're both, at least they have been, they did well. I'm not gonna say how well, but well on their first assignments. And so that's something that could be taken care of by, if it was sent in and it went astray, there's a way to track that. A or B extra credit is worth 60 points at least. And if we do a walking tour, it's possible that I might increase that to 70, depending on how many people have, if anyone. No one has close to 60. A couple people have 10 and one person has 20. So no one's come close to the maximum. So, and then there's also from the just shy, Lemieux, Houston, I didn't yet receive a paper. Now, of course, you can still turn them in late, either one or both papers, but it's getting late enough in the semester. The second paper is due next week, 1 week from today. So you do want to get that in. If you didn't, just a heads up, your first paper, you should try to get that in soon and then pivot to working on your second paper. Okay, but before we get into today's topic, and I'm going to give you more of an overview than I usually do, which, if you recall, when I do that context, I call it, you don't have to take notes until the slide itself is on, the first must know is on the screen. But it might be helpful because it would apply to the meaning, of course, in a broad sense of today's must know slides. And so even with all that background and the 2 slides, there'll be more notes than usual on 2 or 3. I may cut one of the 3, but one of them, and I'll tell you when we get to it, is very high probability of being on the final. Before we get to this lecture today, anybody have any questions about extra credit, late assignments, grades, missing whatever responses? I always respond when I see someone's email that day or within 24 hours. Like I said, if you email me on Friday evening, I'm not gonna get back to you till Sunday because I take Saturday off as a family day. Anybody have any questions about anything relating to the class, grading, extra credit? Okay, and your next paper, everyone should know, I've already mentioned. Why don't we just double confirm? Everyone should have in front of you, of course, the syllabus with all the due dates on it. April 20th by midnight. And that's 1 week from today, of course. And it needs to be submitted, right, as a PDF with the cover sheet, which I will send to you this weekend. Possibly Friday, but anyway, but I won't wait till Monday or Sunday, late Sunday night. So you can have that downloaded and included in the file, hopefully all in one single file, the cover sheet that can be used to give you the grades you earn, and all the comments or how you will get to know why. Just like with the first paper, if you miss points, you'll see how and what you were missing. And then you have the option, I've said this before, but not maybe everybody was here or was focused on this at the beginning of the Monday class. Everyone has an option in any of my classes of submitting a draft before the final version of their paper, not on the day before it's due, but if you did it by Friday, I certainly would get back to you over the weekend with my feedback as to whether you're missing anything or not. So of course, that could be helpful in some cases. But just keep that in mind. I check as late as 5 or even 6, let's say 5 to be safe, on Friday, my emails from that whole week. If I hadn't already responded, which I usually do the day before, I check Thursday. When I'm up here in Santa Rosa teaching 2 different classes, I don't always have time to check my email, let alone respond, but I certainly do Thursdays and Fridays. So if someone has a draft, partial, or complete version, you need to say that, though. This is an important detail. A lot of times people just send me the paper a couple days, 3 days before the deadline. They don't say anything. So, oh, good. Then I'm going to start grading, or send it to a reader to start grading, because it's just an early submission, which you have that option. But if you want me to give you feedback, you need to be specific and ask that, address that in your email. Please let me know if I'm missing anything or something like that, or I appreciate your comments, or take a quick look at my paper and let me know if I need to add something. Then I'll know that you need that back to you well before the deadline. Again, I wouldn't push it past Friday, because then it gives me over the next day or 2 to get back to you, so you'll have enough time if needed to make those corrections. Okay, and then I think I've already held up, but just in case, the format, and then we'll get started with today's topic of how to submit these. Pretty much everyone's done this. 1 or 2 people might not on their first paper, and that is not to forget to label them. Your email, right, tag, I guess you would call it, attachment, I should say, should be labeled correctly. And that would be this way. Once again, in case you didn't see it or didn't take a screenshot, this will be, of course, on the recorded lecture that will be kept on YouTube on my new channel. And remember, I do need to remind 1 or 2 of you, in case you might not have been here Monday, that everything is back to working, but not on my old channel. I'll get to that in a minute. So I need to make sure you all know it's our 2.1, obviously, short paper number 2. The cover sheet will actually have that on it. Underline last name, comma, first name, and then you send it. You can send it to Outlook. I will accept it, of course, because it's the campus email address. As always, I would. But if you want to cover your bases, you could do both. But if you just want to send to one and be sure that you get it graded in a timely manner and returned your grade in a same as the other papers, not later than anyone else, it's the safest is to send it to markw@aol.com. Okay, we covered that before. About the website I just checked, only a couple people have looked at, but at least that proves people have been able. And I asked 2 of my 3 readers to do it too. My new channel, if I did mention it, but in case you weren't logged in at the beginning of the Monday class or weren't here the whole Monday, it's working now as Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures 2. That's the key, because I had to create a new channel. And the old one is somehow still blocked. No idea why. It doesn't matter. It's a moot point at this stage. So now every lecture starting from last week, from all, well, I only have 2 at the moment, Zoom art history classes from this semester, and those will be posted by usually before 8 p.m. on Friday. And I've already done that with last week's lectures. But then you do need to go, when you do that, to search for that, you need to go to the general app for YouTube, or just pull up YouTube, and then in the search window, put that, what I just said, that my old logo. It used to be a brown circle with an M. What happens is it's green. I didn't choose the color. I guess YouTube does that. In any case, that would be in the window, search window, Mark Wilson's SRJC RTC Lectures 2, and then you'll get a choice of various options on the left hand. So the upper left hand corner is filters, and then just hit either this week or this month and you'll see them. Okay, so we've covered all the house cleaning stuff. But before we get started, anybody have any questions about anything relating to any topics besides today's lecture we're about to start? Anybody have any grading questions or extra credit? Okay, again, afterwards, I'll stick around after the last slide. All right, so let's do a little extra context. I think the best way to do this, again, you could just listen, or you could take some or partial or complete notes. But I think it's important because both of the two most important slides today, and I'll go ahead and tell you what the first one is, and then when we get to it, I'll repeat that, which is what's on the syllabus, of course, is Ship's Head from Oseberg, Norway. I'll spell those out for you when we get to it, but the point is why I'm bringing this up, the extra context, a little more detailed than usual, is because we haven't talked about the difference between the northernmost, say that fast 5 times, northernmost parts of Europe and the rest of the continent during the Middle Ages, or at any point during even the ancient world. The Romans never got into Scandinavia. They got pretty far north. They got into Scotland. They conquered the southern third of Scotland, and then they had their butts kicked by my ancestors. Yes, of Scottish heritage, out of that part of Scotland and down into what's now England, and then he stayed there for 400 years. But the point is, the northern part of Europe we're going to focus on with the first must-know, the Ship's Head from Oseberg, and that's a slide. I'll repeat it when it's on the screen. That is not only not going to get cut from the study list, but has a high probability, it's the most important slide for today's lecture, of being on the final. And so what I want to give you is just a quick overview of what does it mean to say Scandinavia? Well, if you know people in a part of the world, you may have met, co-workers, friends, or even fellow students. It's usually defined as everything from Denmark north in Europe, and that would be 4 countries: Denmark, Norway, today, of course, Sweden, and Finland. But I know this because my first, girlfriend in high school was a Finnish exchange student. She was from northern Finland, up around the Arctic Circle, and they don't consider themselves Scandinavian. You don't have to know this really clear. They consider themselves to be of a unique ethnic origin. In fact, they have a myth that they came from the North Star. They're not linguistically or genetically similar to the Scandinavians. And the Vikings, that's the key here we're going to cover. The Vikings were in the parts of Europe that we now still call Scandinavia, or now we do. But that would only be Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Those are the 3 areas we're going to cover. And they were one of the most incredible cultures in the medieval world. They were well ahead of the rest of Europe in several ways, which we'll talk about when we get to this slide in just a minute. And so when you hear the word Scandinavia or Norse or Viking, the two kind of overlap geographically, right? Modern Scandinavia is very different than the ancient Viking cultures. Obviously, they're peaceful, neutral countries that don't usually get into what they used to. In the Middle Ages and even the Renaissance, there were some pretty violent kings in those areas that caused wars in Europe. Sounds familiar, right? All the way through, and that's true of almost all of Europe, right? During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So they were a warlike culture, and obviously completely different today. So when we say that, we say the Norse culture, or which is what the first slide is from, or Vikings. The two words are almost synonymous. You pretty much can say they're synonyms, mean the same thing. Then we're talking about what today is called Scandinavia. Okay, so let's get to the first must-know slide here. Let's get rid of this. And then move this out of the area, out of the way. Okay, everybody can see this? Yeah, right? Always need to have confirmation. Yep, you guys can see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right, so here we go. Here's the title and the spelling again before we talk about the meaning. which is quite a bit to say. This is ships. There should be an apostrophe, I know. And I notice in the newspapers these days, there's a lot of typos that should have been caught by the editors. I didn't catch this one. So I'm not going to take points off. If it's on the exam and you wrote it just the way it's on the syllabus, obviously you get credit. But it means, ships, as in from a ship, apostrophe S, head from Oseberg. Now that's a town in Norway. So I'll spell that Oseberg. Norway, I think everybody knows how to spell Norway, right? Norway, the country, of course, and 820. Okay, let's start with the first fact about the meaning is that this is Stocksted's title, in case you're using Stockstead for partial, sources for studying or to have next to you during the exam. Of course, it's an open book and open note test. She actually has misnamed this piece. This is not a ship's head. This is only 4.5 inches long. It's a piece of carved, so I'll say this slowly, repeat it, a piece of carved bone, okay, that is a model for a ship's head. So if you're taking careful notes, you should write it that way, that in reality or actuality, this is not actually from a ship. No Viking ship would have a 4-inch long decoration on their, here we go. Yeah, good timing. Good timing. We just got started with the first must know, okay? And it's the ship's head from Oseberg, Oseberg, Norway, 820. Of course, that's a common error. Okay, so why is it important? Because the Vikings would have used this kind of a decorative carving in wood, not bone, that was several feet, more like 4 or 5 feet long, from the tip of the nose to the back of the head, as part of the decoration, or as the actually main decoration on the prow, right? Obviously, that everyone knows that's the front of their Viking longboats. I'll say it again. This kind of decoration, the actual ship's heads, which this isn't, it's a small carved, let's say, model for a ship's head, probably given to some kind of carpenter or group of carpenters to make the real ship's head, which is long lost. So this is just a small, like a miniature version of a real ship's head, but it is the pattern they could have easily used. In fact, we know they use this kind of pattern. We'll talk about what is this animal or creature in a minute, but just to make sure the context of where it would have been on the front of a Viking longboat. And those boats we're going to talk about in the next few minutes over the meeting were incredibly versatile means of transportation. They could go both over any body of water and over land. Now that should surprise a few of you. How could some of you know, if you've been watching all the various, HBO or History Channel or whatever they are, National Geographic specials on Vikings, or even some of the dramatic series based on Vikings, that they could do amazing things with these longboats. We'll get to more what that means in a minute. But what is this creature? Nobody can really say. So the best way to describe it is it's a mythical, dragon-like or sea serpent-like creature, meaning that the Vikings, of course, would have used it as a symbol of what? Of their power and their aggressive, conquests. They conquered every part of Europe that they invaded. The Vikings, I don't think, well, they must have lost a few battles, but very rare. Just say Viking invaders landed in these longboats on the shores of almost every major kingdom in medieval Europe. I'll say it again. They landed on the shores of almost every medieval kingdom on the shores of Europe. And when they invaded, they always won their battles. They would take over one city maybe, or a whole province, or even a whole kingdom, whatever the local commander, the ruler of that invading group of Vikings wanted to take over, they almost always succeeded. They were in other words, another way to say that is they were the fiercest warriors in medieval Europe. Nobody would argue with that. And so to symbolize their fierceness and their ability to strike fear, there we go, strike fear in their, victims, I mean, what else you could say, in their enemies, they would decorate their boats. They're these long wooden boats called longboats with the front end, the prow, with a large, several feet long wooden carved head of a mythical creature like a dragon. That could be what this is, or a sea serpent. Other historians think it might be a kind of a actual real animal like a dog, some kind of a, a wolf or something like that, a fierce, canine. That's possible, but it definitely isn't a normal dog's head, obviously. But we know these here, these patterns are intertwined snakes. And snakes, of course, have a kind of a fearsome, rather frightening, I guess you could say, image or reputation in the minds of most people. And so if that's what this is meant to do, then the snakes on the side, carved into the side of the head of this mythical dragon or sea serpent creature, would have been another way of striking fear in their enemies as they were approached, along the sea. So in other words, when the Vikings landed, I like to say it this way, you don't have to write this phrase, but whenever the Vikings invaded a country, if you saw a Viking longboat heading towards the shore of your city or your kingdom, you had two choices: run if you were fighting age. Okay, I should say that when you were an adult male. You had two choices: run or die. Because the Vikings didn't usually spare the fighting age males, but then they would, when they captured a town or even a kingdom, they would take the women and children and either make them slaves in their own back in Scandinavia or sell them to slave traders. When there were slave traders all over the ancient world, of course, in North Africa and the Middle East and in Europe and Russia. So they often made slaves or sold them to other slave dealers, the women and children, whereas the male inhabitants, fighting age, they usually just killed them. So you rarely could win a battle against the Vikings, and the people on the coastlines of Europe knew that. So they started by invading England, and then they went around the coasts of France, Spain, Italy, even what's now Greece, and all the way into the Black Sea, where, that's now where some of the fighting is, right? Everyone knows that if you're following the news, between Ukraine and Russia. So the Black Sea separates Russia and Turkey, and the Turkish Empire was already starting to spread. Well, it wasn't called the Turkish Empire then, but just say the Muslim conquests were beginning to go further north, but they hadn't gotten into Russia. The Vikings attacked and conquered several major Russian cities, both from the south and the north. And I wish I had a map. I didn't see one in the file that this came from, of Scandinavia, so you could see how it borders Russia, what's now today Russia. So they attacked the Russian towns and cities from northern Russia, from Scandinavia, but they also attacked another group, of course, whole different groups of conquerors, Viking conquerors with their longboats, landed in the southern shore, what's now Ukraine. Back then, it would have been called the Kingdom of Rus, or Russia, early, Ukrainian cities, and like Kiev. Kiev was around 1,200 years ago when the Vikings were around, or Kiev, as some people pronounce it. They would have taken their longboats, and if you look at a map, there are rivers, but there's also huge open countryside. They carried their boats. This is a detail of what I was saying earlier about how amazing they were in terms of their ability to, find and sail around any parts of the known world. They actually took their Viking boats and carried them on their shoulders across open land when they couldn't find a river, deep enough to get into the interior of some kingdom they wanted to conquer. So in other words, to summarize, you could say they not only did they use their boats to travel all around the coastline of Europe, they, in some places, especially Russia, they actually picked up these boats and carried them on their shoulder for miles, shoulders, all the way across, maybe, for days, until they got to the next large river. So nowhere was safe from the Vikings. If they chose to invade, they could go all the way into the interior, which they did in what's now Russia and Ukraine, in different groups of Vikings. The last thing to say about them is they were the greatest navigators. Well, that's implied, but what I said, they actually are the first European, the first, nobody argues with this, European explorers to land in North America, or to, you could say, even find, and discover is a relative term, but to find or land, either word will do, on the coast of North America. They not only did they land in what's now Canada and what would be New England in this country, northern eastern United States, where Massachusetts is and Maine, those states. So they landed both on the coasts of what's now Canada and New England in what's now the US. They founded colonies that were there for 100 years. This doesn't get mentioned in a lot of history books, or very briefly. 500 years before Columbus, in the late 900s, they reached North America. And that's, look how far that is from Scandinavia. Now, it's true they didn't do it across open sea. They went across, you don't have to know this, but first from what would be England, where they'd already conquered several parts of that coastline, or Scotland. And then from there to Iceland and then Greenland, each place they left colonies where they left behind some of their soldiers and formed their own new kingdom, right? And then they eventually got across from Greenland into Canada and south into New England. Pretty remarkable achievements. And most of the rest of Europe was so isolated in the Middle Ages that obviously they didn't realize that this one northern edge of that continent, there were people that had actually discovered the whole, Western hemisphere for the first time among Europeans. So now there's no debating that those things happen. The final fact about the meaning is they were the greatest wood and metal workers, or carvers, or wood carvers and metal workers. They were great craftsmen. The Celts, they were Celts. I think I said that on Monday, but if you didn't write it, then now you should. C-E-L-T. So the last fact about the meaning now is they were Celtic. C-E-L-T-I-C. That means that they were of that culture that predated the Roman Empire, that spoke some variety of Celtic, which is a language none of us would understand at all. It's not a root language of any modern European, but it is still spoken in some rural parts of Europe. So they were Celts, which meant they were fierce warriors, and the Vikings were the fiercest of all the Celts. And they had their own language and religion. Thor, you've all heard of Thor, right? How many Marvel movies has that been a character in, right? That god, Norse or Viking god. That's where Thor was first, found in the history of their religious beliefs. So their religion and their language and their culture was Celtic, C-E-L-T-I-C, and that not only meant they were fiercest warriors in Europe and the greatest navigators, but third and final fact now is that they also were the greatest wood carvers and metal workers in Europe at that time. So the carving of this head really kind of indicates or proves that point. Okay, so that's more than enough, of course, on the meaning. Remember, all you'll have to remember is 6 if you choose, or you could write more, but a minimum of 6 sentences or 6 facts out of all those, if it's on the slide essay part of the final. Let's do the formal analysis. And this one's not as clear cut as some of them, but the first thing, it should be obvious, is that I don't see a straight line in it. I mean, you could make the case that the carvings on the snout, right, just adjacent to the nose, that's what that would be called, right, the snout, between the eye and the nose, or nostrils, that those look like straight lines, but look, they're all curved anyway, because it's not a flat surface. So I don't see a straight line anywhere, which would make this entirely dynamic with no straight lines, no stable elements. Okay, for space, 2 facts. One is that the actual 3-dimensional object in real space is 4.5 inches long and about 4 inches tall. So it's almost the same width and length, slightly longer. So it's very small, but there is a technique for space, and that is overlapping. The snake-like creatures, you could say, just snakes, if you want to say, they overlap each other. And then there is some kind of a pattern here. It's hard to say what is that. It's decoration. So I wouldn't even call that overlapping. So just the part of the head behind the eyes, behind the eye bond, below the mouth, has overlapping of the snake patterns. The color is warm, even though it's bone, and bone we usually think of, but of course human bones can be, or any animal bones can be warm. This one, the way it looks now, it's all we have to work on. It's in a museum in Norway, by the way, is kind of a light tan color. So that's definitely an earth tone or warm color. This isn't part of it, in case it's not obvious. That's from the museum where it's on display. That's a modern piece of wood, as a holding it up, right? So the original piece ended right here. The line here is all carved, everything here. Of course, it's very deep carving. And then we have the rhythm. It's very powerful. The decorative patterns, obviously not realistic. We'll get to some of the textures in just a few seconds, but the line here is carved on the snout, around the eye, and all over the rest of the head, where all the snake's patterns are. So it's all carved line. And there's deep modeling here, which you could say is part of the actual composition, because these pieces are so deeply recessed, the section, I mean, of this piece, where the shadows are, that it forms part of the composition. Then, of course, now it's a lighting of the museum, you could say, that causes the shadows, but originally it would have been the sun. This would have been seen in the daytime. The Vikings rarely needed to attack at night. They weren't worried about surprise, although sometimes they use surprise when they attacked the village. They would have attacked at broad daylight because they knew they were going to win almost everywhere they invaded. So you could just say it would have been the sun creating these shadows and creating a very strong modeling effect. And then we have the fact the largest mass, well, I don't see if you could break it down, since it just really the head and not even the neck. And there's no way to divide it. So it's a single mass, about 4.5 inches long. The texture, is it realistic? Well, I would say on the nose, right, or at least right the end of the nose, right, not the snout. I don't know any living creature that has that pattern on its snout, but just on the nose. And some people think the eyeball, but that's pretty much just the smooth, actual, real texture. So you have both the real smooth texture of the bone and the simulated texture on, I would just say, the nose and the mouth. The mouth, definitely, it's missing a few teeth, but you can see some of the teeth are still visible here, and the lips, right? So there is simulated texture on the mouth and the end of the nose. Otherwise, I don't know. You could say, but I don't think that's realistic on the snakes, intertwining snakes. That's just geometric patterns. Is it balanced? Yes, it is. I would say both ways. You draw the line behind the eyes and then just across the top of the mouth from front to back. It's balanced in both ways. And of course, if you looked at head dead on, it would be symmetrical. Okay, I think we've covered all of the techniques. Rhythm. Did I say rhythm? Yeah, the repeated shapes of the snakes, and the geometry. I didn't actually. The rhythm is where you see the repeated overlapping snakes, and of course there would be two eyes if you look at it from head on, and the geometric pattern above the mouth. We could say the teeth and the bottom of the jaw too. Okay, any questions about this? All right, now I think I'm going to go ahead, because I don't have a good slide. An old, not very well focused black and white is what I found when I looked up. These are from, this slide I found myself on the internet, but in Stockstead, that last one, and others for this topic, today's topic, of course, or this week's early medieval art in Europe. Pretty much the only source I was able to find all these slides, but I'm going to go ahead and let's cross out one of them right now. So assuming you have your pens out and the syllabus next to the screen, it's actually the least interesting and most unclear in terms of the quality of the slide of all the slides for this week's topic. So under week 12, obviously for today's notes, second from the bottom, go ahead and take your pen and cross out the doors of Bishop Bernewald at St. Michael's. Part of the reason I almost always eliminate is because if it's a long title, and it's really not very interesting. It's about some unknown bishop in some small city in Germany in the early Middle Ages or mid-Middle Ages. So it's not that important to the history of the concept of art. It's just a carved wooden door. And like I said, I don't have a good slide. So everybody got that? If you didn't already do this, you should be crossing off the second from the last or from the bottom of this week 12 list. Just won't be on the test. Doors, and we're not covering it. Doors of Bishop Bernewald at St. Michael's. All right. Now about the terms to know. If you weren't here, you definitely want to watch or missed any part of the lecture on Monday, the full lecture, and make sure you write down. There were 3 terms. I'm not going to give you the definitions. We already did that. But for those who either didn't get them or joined late or just weren't here Monday, at least one of these terms will appear, if not maybe more than one on the final in the true false section. Animal style, medieval, it's different meaning than animal style in the ancient world. That's an important point or distinction. So I gave that definition specifically for medieval versions of the animal style. Illuminated manuscript, right? And then staff. So that means we don't have any new definitions to cover for this week. We've covered all those new definitions as of the Monday, end of the lecture on Monday. Okay, so this is the next must know. I'm not saying it has a high probability of being on exam, but I probably won't cut it from the study list. It's our last from week 12. It's St. Basil's Cathedral, Moscow, 1555. So St. Basil's, you can abbreviate Saint or write the whole word out. But usually you abbreviate it ST period. Basil's is BASIL''S. Cathedral, comma, Moscow. I think everyone knows how to spell Moscow, right? And then the date is 1555. Well, there's quite a bit of meaning to this slide too. But we'll start with the fact that it's the most famous site of any kind in all of Russia. Every time you see it, you could include it if it's on the essay part of the final. The fact that one of the facts about the meaning is it's the most famous or most photographed, you could say it that way, or well-known. Yeah, there's another way to say well-known image of any sites anywhere in Russia, because it is a very unique version, is the next fact about the meaning, a unique version of Russian Orthodox church architecture, or you could say church style. Russian Orthodox church style. What does that mean? That is a very specific, guys, and obviously Russian version of Greek Orthodox. It's basically a form of Greek Orthodox, and we covered that earlier. But if you missed that or haven't and didn't watch the video from last week that I finally got posted on my second YouTube channel, I held up a diagram. Obviously, I'm not going to do that now. That shows the three main features of Greek Orthodox churches. This has all three of those, but when you first look at it, it might not look at all like any of the Greek Orthodox slides that we covered last week under early Christian art. It looks, or 2 weeks ago, it doesn't look the same, but it is. Just say, in other words, in a single statement, that this is a very distinct style called Russian Orthodox architecture, which is a version or form of a more ornate, you could even say form of Greek Orthodox architecture. We'll get to how in a minute, but first, where is it and why was it built? Those are the main facts about the meeting. Well, I think most people know it's in Red Square. I mean, that's what the current name of it is. A very large, one of the largest public squares in the world, can hold 300,000 people. It's huge. There aren't many squares that big anywhere in the world. So it's one of the world's largest open public spaces or public squares, called Red, just like it sounds, to the word square. And that's outside or next to the walls of the Kremlin. The Kremlin, of course, with a capital K, is where the czars of Russia used to rule, and where Putin does now, right? Where the communist regime and now the current dictator of Russia has their offices, or have. So the Kremlin was the reason this was built, because in the 1500s, the czar who ordered this, right? Czar is a Russian word for emperor, built this cathedral as atoning for a sin he committed, for some act, some horrible act. And I'll tell you what that is in a minute. So that's the reason this was built. It was built by, the czar's name was Ivan. It's like, you know, the first word, Ivan the Terrible. You've probably heard of him. It's one of the most famous czars of Russia of all time, because he expanded the Russian Empire, and he was very brutal, both to his own people and to the neighbors. Again, sounds familiar. So this guy, Tsar Ivan the Terrible, what did he do that was so terrible that he felt enough guilt to spend the money and the effort, the work, to hire the best architects in Russia to build this cathedral? Well, here's what he did. He killed his own son. in front of a room full of people. I think I mentioned that maybe a little earlier when we talked about stats, but if you didn't write it then, now this is part of the meaning for sure of this slide. Just briefly, what he did was demand of his oldest son, who would going to be his successor, would have been the next Tsar. Didn't live to have that opportunity because his father killed him over what? A fight about his son's wife. Ivan the Terrible wanted or tried to force, demanded is probably the best word, demanded that his own son let him sleep with his son's wife. Well, the son said no, of course. And it was in a public audience, right, in the Kremlin. This happened inside the Kremlin where the czars have their throne room. So you could just say during an audience with dozens of people in the same room, and where he was on his throne, his son standing in front of him refused to allow his father, Ivan the Terrible, to sleep with his wife. So Ivan's response was to strike his son across the temple with his staff. And it killed his son, not instantly, but his son within a few minutes died in his father's arms. And the whole room saw it. But he was the king. Obviously, remember that's the philosophy of might makes right. I mentioned that. So under that concept, the king can do no wrong. Whatever the king does is okay, right? Still find that concept still alive in many parts of the world. Back then, that was the norm everywhere. So in Western world, so he got away with it. Nobody would dare accuse him of murder, even though obviously it was murder. So what he did out of guilt was to hire the greatest architects he could find in all of his empire, and it was called the Russian Empire then. To come to Moscow and design the most beautiful cathedral in his whole kingdom or in all of Russia. And this is the result. And the only other thing that I think it's interesting is when you go there, if you go to Russia, the tour guides, if you take a tour, as I have more than once in English, when we adopted my daughter, we did one of those tours with an individual tour guide, and she told us, this is a myth, but I'm going to tell you what tour guides try to tell gullible American and foreign tourists, which is, oh, after this was built, the Tsar liked it so much that he had the two architects blinded so they would never design another building as beautiful anywhere. BS, total BS. Those architects went on to build and design churches all over Russia. So I don't think a blind architect could design squat. So that's just a story that's told to tourists for entertainment value. It's not true at all. He didn't put the eyes out of the architects. But it is their most famous building. I don't know their names even. They were long Russian names. You don't need to know the name of the architect, but he found the best ones he could find who were experienced church builders. And that's the result. And the final thing about the meaning is, let's look at these, a closer view here. These onion domes, I mentioned this with the last slide, I think it was last week, right at the end of the Islamic architecture. So it's relevant very much so on this slide for the meaning. Russians invented the onion dome, not Muslims. Russians invented the onion dome. There's no question that it existed over 12 centuries ago. I've been in churches in what's now Ukraine, not even Russia anymore, of the oldest Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox churches in all of what was then, of course, the Soviet Union, or the Kingdom of Russia was all under one government back in the Middle Ages, right? The Tsars ruled all of what's Russia and Ukraine together, as well as parts of Poland. That was a big empire. So you could just say that this style spread from what's now Ukraine north into Russia, but it first appeared in what's now Ukraine, or you can say the Russian kingdom. You can say it that way, 12 centuries ago, way before the Muslims used it on their mosques. Okay, so that's it for the meaning. Let's do a formal analysis, and then I'll stick around for any questions you have. As you can see, we've been in quite early today. Okay, so if it's on the exam, I think, yeah, let's see if I can do this where because this is the largest image I could get that wasn't copywritten. I'll probably show it like that. Yeah, so you can see, closer up, larger images. So let's say with the color, wow, it's a riot of color. It really is a beautiful sight to see the real thing. It's breathtaking when you walk up close. So let's do the color first. The color is a mixture of variety of warm and cool, more warm than cool, but then you got to say the green mixing with the yellow, obviously both on this dome here. And then the white and blue is all cool, of course, here. And then again, back to, and one of my students said once it looked like something from Disneyland. I guess it does, but don't want you to think of it that way, because that's not the inspiration. I don't think of any rides or any structures in Disneyland, just in some of their cartoon movies like Aladdin, right? So what you have here is alternating warm and cool colors on the yellow and green domes, alternating warm and cool colors of white and red brick. It's brick, the whole structure. You don't have earthquakes here, so you don't have to worry about it. It's brick with some stone decoration. So the white part is probably stone. Actually, it is. I remember now when I went up to touched it. So there's white, cool colors of stone interlaid or interspersed, you can say, or inlaid, or alternating. You could just say alternating with the red brick wall. So obviously it's both cool and warm. And then the tower is the same. Here you've got, white decorative stonework set into brick red warm walls, and then the spire itself is almost all warm, including the gold. That is real gold on the tallest onion dome. The rhythm is really obvious. You've got the repeated shapes of the onion domes, the decorative details, well, the windows, and these are windows, some round, some rectangular, repeated shapes here. And then the spire here, right, is repeated, the rhythm of that on these smaller spires above the end. That's how you get in this covered walkway. It gets really cold in Russia in the winter. The snow can be a couple feet deep, so they want people to enter safely and not freeze to death while they're waiting to get into church services. It would have been through this entrance, this covered walkway, and those, of course, are spires reflecting the same shape as the main one. The largest mass is the central dome, and it is a dome. When I was inside it, I remember I looked up and you could see about that high. The dome goes up to about 80 feet, and then the spire another 20 feet, and then the onion dome. So it's over 100 feet tall, the total height. So for space, it's a real open, or you could say one large open domed room with smaller side chapels. Each one of these towers has a small chapel underneath. But the main dome reaches a height of over 80 feet. And then the total height to the top of that spire is over 100, to say slightly over or about 100 feet. I think it's more like 105 or something. But okay, so that's the real space. There's no techniques for space. The line is visual line, but there's some carved. It's hard to see, so you can just keep it simple. Say it looks like just around the edges of the windows and the corners of the towers, the visual line that all buildings have. And that, of course, is created by the shadows from the sun. And that's all natural modeling. There's no technique. And then we have the textures. Well, the textures are the real rough texture of brick and stone on the walls. And these are metal. All of these domes are metal. Obviously, the gold is, well, it's not obviously, it's gold over, right? Gilt over some other form of metal. I'm not sure what kind of metal. You can say smooth, real textures of metal on all the domes. And then smooth, real texture of glass in the windows. And of course, rough, real textures, right, of brick and stone. And then we have, is it balanced? I would say from this angle, it looks unbalanced, of course, to the left. But if you walk around it, there's another onion dome, just barely visible, the corner of it from this slide. So depending on which angle, from some side views or some angles, it looks roughly balanced, with the main tower and dome inside the tower being placed in the middle. And that's the largest mass, the main tower or central tower with the dome. And then these are almost the same, almost equal masses around the edge. Or you could say the tallest, right, onion domes, right? And then the next tallest one would be this middle one, and there's a fourth, but you only have to remember are the three largest masses. Okay, and let's see, balanced rhythm line, I think I mentioned stable. Oh, stable or dynamic, yeah, we want to end with that. Boy, this is almost entirely dynamic. However, the edges, at least, well, obviously around the framing of the windows, those are stable. well, at least the rectangular windows. But that's about it. There's some stable detail, but everything else is either diagonal lines to, tapering up toward the top of this tower, or obviously all the domes are dynamic with all the curves. So it's mostly dynamic. Oh, there is one more fact about the meaning. I don't think it's a minor one, but you don't have to add more if you already written at least 6 sentences under meaning. But it's not a minor fact about it. It was the Cathedral of Moscow for centuries, this church. And when the communists took over, they converted it into a warehouse for their army. For decades under the communist dictators, it was not allowed to hold church services. So wherever the bishop was of Moscow was forced to go somewhere else if they were even allowed to have churches. And of course, the communist regimes are atheists by definition. They teach that there is no God, and religion is the opium of the masses, is what Marx said, right? So all you have to try to say, it ceased functioning as a church after several centuries being the Cathedral of Moscow, if you want to write this last fact. And then under the communists, while it was, Russia was ruled as the Soviet Union by the communists until Gorbachev. Gorbachev, the last communist, I mean, he was a dictator, he wasn't elected, but he was really enlightened compared to what they have now. He opened all the churches and synagogues and mosques all over Russia. It's one of the first things he did. So it reopened as a cathedral, but it isn't anymore the Cathedral of Moscow because they had a new one built a couple miles away somewhere else, which is even bigger and nowhere near as beautiful. So this is no longer the Cathedral of Moscow, but it is a cathedral and it's functioning, and they have regular church services on Sundays. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to end early, but I'm going to stick around for any questions. So let's stop to share. Anybody have any questions about either anything we've covered or anything you might have missed that, you of course can always watch what you missed from any lecture, obviously on now my YouTube channel, number 2, or about extra credit grades, your upcoming papers. I hope you're all working on your second paper by now. And you should have done the research or be nearly done with it, and be able to finish writing well before Sunday night. So if you want me to, you send me before Sunday, hopefully sooner than that, but Friday or at the latest Saturday, a draft, and tell me you want feedback. Then I'll get back to you no later than Sunday afternoon.
Could you restate space and masses, please?
Oh, on the last slide, St. Basil, just that, right? Okay, for space, sure. There's one large open domed room with a ceiling that's about 80 feet high, and then another 20 feet or so altogether, a total of a height of about 100 feet or around 100 feet on the central tower. And then the other part of the meeting is pretty simple, is there are several smaller side chapels. You don't have to know the dimensions. So the height of the whole structure, the central tower, is about 100 feet, but the dome inside, the open domed room where they hold the church services, is about an 80-foot ceiling. Okay, and then you said, what was the other, mass?
Yeah, masses.
Oh, sure, the largest mass is the central tower. And then it would be that I think it's 3. Yeah, it is. It's 3 tallest side towers, or you could say adjacent towers. You have to know the dimensions of those. Each one of those is an open. You can walk in and look up. In other words, toward the ceiling. And so those are the second largest mass because they're about equal height. And then the shorter domes around them. There's like 8 domes, 8 towers, with each one with its own dome. So you could just say the third largest mass are the shorter towers, dome towers, if you want to write that way. Okay, hope that is helpful. Any other questions about anything else that we've covered, or anything related to grading, or anything else? Because next week, oh, I do have a question to ask. I doubt this is even possible, but it can't hurt to ask. I was just talking to my daughter. I think so. She comes with me here sometimes, and occasionally she's looking up on the internet. What is a reasonable price? This is just off the record, for one of those machines you can order from, of course, Amazon. Where else would it be? That you can use at home to convert slides. I'm talking about old 35 millimeter slides that are still really sharp, because I'd love to do that to show you guys where you won't need to take notes because they're not digitalized. medieval towns in Europe. There's some incredibly beautiful towns that were never destroyed during either World War I or World War II, in places like Germany and Holland and France, which I'd love to share with you, but I can't because they're 35 millimeter slides in a Kodak carousel slide tray. But you could, I know this is true, right? You can do this at home, right? Does anybody know what a reasonable price is? My daughter was looking, and they're all over the place. Some as low as 30 bucks. I wouldn't trust those. They're probably cheap or badly, deteriorated used quality. Does anybody know what a reasonable price would be for that? If you want for extra credit, and you can send me a link to something where you've taken a little time to see what the reviews are. I'm so busy. I've got all kinds of things going right now. I won't take time up with. Yeah, has anybody done that or know someone who's done that? A teacher, friend, yourselves, family members? You know what I'm talking about? The thing where you put the slide in, and then I don't know, has high resolution, whatever function that then converts that into part of a digital file. When you're done, you've got a complete digitalized file of a whole tray full of slides or whatever selection or number you want. And then that obviously can be transferred to a to a flash drive, and then I can put it in my laptop. Anybody know what a reasonable price for that kind of thing is? If you want to, for extra credit, 5 points, if you send me a link, which you hopefully would check first that it isn't one of the cheaper versions. Yeah, that'd be helpful. Okay. Yeah, for everyone, because if I can, then we'll have more relaxed and less, those are where you don't have to take any notes. If you know the movie Pinocchio, Disney's version of Pinocchio, right? The cartoon version. I don't know if he made a live action version. He might have. They're doing so much of that Disney now, just to milk more money out of their classic film library, right? I have, my nephew works for Disney, by the way, and he loves the job there down in Southern California. Anyway, the point is that those cartoons, especially the one of Pinocchio, it was, the little wooden boy walks through a medieval looking village. It's supposed to be Switzerland. It's actually in Germany. I've been there. The artist who painted and then drew those stills, they're called, back when everything was done by hand, right, in the 1930s or 40. I think the film came out in 40. Well, World War II had just started, and they were Jewish, most of them. They were working for Disney, and they were American citizens, of course, and they were almost stuck in Germany behind the Nazi lines. But then the war between France, the invasion of France hadn't occurred that early. So they got out just before Hitler invaded France, and perhaps they would have been totally trapped, and God knows what would happen. They brought back drawings of this village. It's called Rothenburg. It's one of the most breathtakingly beautiful places I've ever been. And I've got a great set of slides that will still look good if I can convert them into digital images. So if that's doable this semester, I'll probably have to pay my daughter or one of my teaching assistants to do the physical process. Then you'll get to see those sometime before final exams week for just your own interest or enjoyment. Okay, so if anyone sends me information on that, I can give you guys extra credit. Well, here we are. We were just past 4, so barely an hour. So we're finishing a good, almost 15 minutes early. But one more time, as always, anybody have any questions that you need to ask or that on the tip of your tongue about anything relating to grading, your upcoming papers, extra credit, or anything like that?
For the paper, you're on the formal analysis part, they're not going to be bullet points, right? You're looking for like a paragraph.
Yes, they need to be in an essay format, just like the answers on your essay questions on the final, as you should. Most of you did. I don't think too many people, one or two people did it bullet for. You get points off if you do that because it's not an essay, it's an outline. I mean, you get some credit for that, but why have points taken off before it even gets graded? So yes, you need to keep things in a, sentences in a paragraph. And remember, the minimum is for each half, the formal analysis, at least 6 of the 9 elements in separate sentences. Again, I'll repeat this when the test is about to start. And if you want full credit, you need to provide examples, ideally 2, of where you see each of those elements, like the stable or dynamic lines or whatever. And then the same for the meaning, 6 at least of the facts on the meaning. I know I gave you guys more than that many sentences or facts in your notes for each of the must-know slides. Yeah, so
on the template you sent out that got 100 points, it's bullet points.
It's what?
It's like not an essay. It's not like a full paragraph that goes through each one. I think it's like I think it's like
Not the sample
paragraph.
paper. I think we're comparing apples and oranges, but I'm glad you're asking. This clarification is helpful for anyone who's might not be sure of, so don't use bullet points on any essay answer to either a question on the test, on the final, and I don't think most of you did on the midterm, or on either paper. So I think you're talking about the cover sheet. Right? The cover sheet is just a checklist for you to look at and see. But in the sample paper, it definitely isn't that way. I know, I just looked at it. In fact, it's in my notebook. I don't want to go drag my notebook out here and have you sit there and wait somewhere buried in my notebook. But I sent that to everybody. If you know what, if anyone didn't get that or they deleted or misplaced it, I'll resend that. It's a sample A paper, and that A paper definitely doesn't use bullet points because people would.
I think it does. I remember it. Like I remember seeing it like
It's
that.
not bullet points, but it's like
numbers.
underlined formal and then colon.
Yeah, that's okay. That's not the same as bullet.
Okay, cool.
Right. I'm
Yeah, that's
glad
what I
you're
did. I was like, okay.
This is very valid, important, and by all means, as you know, I always encourage people to ask questions about anything that they don't already don't know for sure as clarification. I want you to keep them separate, the paragraphs and full sentences in, print neatly. If you're doing it on a test, of course, you can type it in if you're using a digital format for, one of your docs that you're going to eventually send me as a PDF, but on the papers, of course, it'll all be typed. Yeah, I mean, that is a requirement for, it has been for, 25 years now. I've been using a similar format. Now, next semester, that could change because we all have to go through this new process of revising our syllabi to a certain degree, not completely, in terms of how we test people. But it's still going to be, I'm sure, because I've talked to the department chair, the current one, I don't know for sure who it is, it's taking over in the fall, but I think they're all having to use the same, we are all teachers in art history at this JC will still need to require essays for, some form of grading, written essays, and the tests can be a combination of things. And I know some teachers only do true false. I've been told, I don't know what this JC, what other teachers in art history I'm talking about do, but I don't think that's a fair assessment of what you learned. So yes, you should write it in full sentences. Each of the two halves of the slide essay answers on your final should be full sentences in paragraphs labeled as such. And you'll have to underline that if you want to, you can, or put an asterisk next to it, but just you should. Then on the test, you don't need to label formal analysis unless you want to. That would make it even clearer. But on your papers, you do, because that's in the 5 requirements. By the way, if you want to, that's another handout that maybe a few of you don't still have. I sent it early in the semester. If you need me to resend that for any reason, where I write out in plain English what all the 5 minimum requirements for a paper to, not have points off in terms of the format and, what you do for the research. That I'll forward to you if you send as a PDF, of course, you asked me to, but I think everybody has that by now, I hope. Before you finish your paper, you should double check that and the cover sheet as a checklist. But that doesn't in any way impact the requirement or remove the requirement for making sure you write your answers, essay questions in full sentences. Okay, any other questions? I think we've covered all the subjects now. One last call. All right, you guys, thanks for all of your, comments and questions. These are helpful, and I will look forward to seeing you all next week. And our topic, of course, your papers are due a week from today, but on Monday, you'll have another chance to ask questions, of course. Actually, now that I think about it, I did misstate one thing. You have until Wednesday, not Monday, for the paper. So even if you sent me a draft on Monday, but it would be cutting it close, I think it's still best to get it to me before or by Sunday at the latest. I definitely take time to answer all the emails I've had since Friday. I don't do Saturdays. That's family day for me in my home, but I do on Sunday catch up with all the backlog if there are very many emails, and that could include a sample draft of your paper, and you get an answer by, well, you might not see it till Monday, but you'd have 48 hours. Don't wait until Monday night, because then you won't hear from me till Tuesday afternoon. That might not give you enough time if you want me to give you feedback if you're missing anything. Okay, so next week we'll do Romanesque art, and if I have a way of converting slides before we get to the end of the semester, for just your own enjoyment or for enlightenment, whatever, that you don't need to take notes on, I'll give you a heads up. All right, one last time. Anybody have any questions about anything?
Thank you.
Yeah,
See you on
thank you,
Monday.
you guys. Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
See you.
Bye.
Sunday. Bye.